just make me a copy.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, April. The agenda has been adopted. We have one item for consideration, and that is the Phase 1 attendance area changes. Mr. Gooch, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for a minute.
Sure, we have Karen Jackson with us tonight, and she's going to go just briefly review those options, and then you have a motion that you'll be making. So she'll start, and then we'll answer any questions if you have those.
Okay. I don't need to press anything, right?
Nope,
Okay.
you're good.
All right. Virtual folks, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So first, like with all of our presentations, we just like to review our overall process. For our Phase 1 options, we are in the recommendation portion, so that last section that you can't see because of the Zoom screens. I can't move that, so it says recommendation there, I promise. This is the remainder of our attendance area change timeline as it currently exists. Phase 1, again, would go into effect in the 24-25 school year. This is just to fill the brand new Russell Elementary addition. Phase 2 would go into effect during the 25-26 school year. This would fill the new Battles Elementary addition as well as balance the schools on that side of the district, on the east side. It would also balance middle and high school enrollments. And again, just balancing the enrollments of the elementary schools that will not be impacted by the new Southwest Elementary. Phase 3 would go into effect in the 26-27 school year, so the fall of 26. Phase 3 would be to fill the new Southwest Elementary School and then balance the enrollment at the remaining schools that are impacted by the new Southwest School. On the right, we have just the key dates for the remainder of the process. It's kind of looking in the past for Phase 1. That's what that blue box is on the right. That's all of our Phase 1 section. Beyond that is Phases 2 and 3, which will be presented to you as entire packages of options. Yes, you can. Thank you. All right. So just to review our boundary options and the results that we received from them. This is our option 1. This moves the area just north of this building. This option fills the new Russell Boulevard addition. It pushes the diversity metrics at Russell Boulevard closer to the district-wide average while also pushing Fairview further away from the district-wide average. This option does remove the three-way feeder split at Fairview Elementary. It improves the Russell Boulevard Elementary feeder split, makes that closer to 50-50 than it exists today, and it leaves room for enrollment growth at Fairview, which is expected to grow over the next 5 years. Option 1 moves 59 students, and you can see on this slide, these are the metrics for what would happen if we were to implement option 1. So these are our results for option 1. On the top left, we have our level of support. So this option received just over 65% of folks saying that they support the option. On the right, we have density maps for those who listed their address at all. That was an optional question in our survey, so some people decided not to do it, which is absolutely fine. On the top, we have those that support option 1, and on the bottom, we have those who do not support option 1, so you can kind of see where our results were coming from. Overall, option 1 was best received by the community. There was support for increasing the diversity at Russell Boulevard. Folks said that it minimizes disruption to established neighborhoods, it maintains the walkability and natural dividing lines that currently exist. There were some concerns about potential overcrowding at Russell and Fairview, as well as the impact on the diversity metrics. And then there were concerns about extended bus route times associated with this option, and then crossing busy intersections for some families. So option 2, on the left, this map shows what would happen in option 2. The areas of change are outlined in yellow. The top, we have our metrics for this option. This option would move 44 students. Option 2, of course, fills the new Russell Elementary addition. That is the whole goal of this, of Phase 1. This pushes the diversity metrics at Grant a little bit closer to the district-wide average, and the diversity metrics at Russell and West further away from the district-wide average. This does create a three-way feeder split at Russell Boulevard. If this were to be updated in phase 2, this would not have an impact to any students. And it also leaves room for enrollment growth at Grant and West, which are both expected to increase over the next 5 years. So again, this is laid out the same as the last one. So top left, we have our level of support. Option 2 received just over 20% of folks supporting this option. And then on the right, we have our maps. The top shows the density of those who support option 2, and the bottom shows the density of those who do not support option 2. From the comments in the survey that we received, the majority of comments were regarding the change to the Grant Elementary attendance area. Some folks were concerned that this increases the distance that some students would travel to school. We heard concerns about the disruption to neighborhood cohesiveness. There were concerns about the impact to feeder patterns. We also heard quite a bit that families chose their homes so that their child could attend Grant Elementary, and this would disrupt that. Some felt that this does not address diversity effectively, and then there were, of course, concerns about bus routes and walkability. So moving on to option 3, if you remember, our option 3 was added a couple days after our first 2 were created. Option 3 doesn't do anything that the other 2 do not, it just kind of combines them. So on the left, we have our map showing the areas that would move in option 3, and then on the right, we have our metrics. This option, like I said, it is a combination of option 1 and 2. It does fill the new Russell Boulevard addition. It is a few more students than were impacted in option 1 and 2. For the diversity metrics, Russell Boulevard would be closer to the district-wide average. Fairview and West would be further away. This does remove that three-way feeder split at Fairview Elementary. It improves the Russell Boulevard feeder split, again, making that a little bit closer to 50-50. And it leaves room for enrollment growth at Fairview and West, again, both expected to increase over the next 5 years. So option 3 received about 26 or 27% support in the survey. On the right, on the top, again, we have our respondents that support option 3, and then below we have our respondents that do not support option 3. Something I should have mentioned earlier is all of these maps are on the same scale, so red equals red throughout all of the maps. For the comments, some felt that option 3 is more disruptive than the other option related to impacting more students. There were geographical factors and community cohesiveness that were mentioned as important considerations with this. Some saw option 3 as a positive step for diversity and enrollment balance. Many stated that they prefer option 1 over option 3. And some expressed support for option 3 due to its impact on diversity and its potential to meet current and future needs, more so related to those enrollment projections. So looking at those who responded to our survey, the vast majority of folks who responded were parents of or guardians of our elementary students, followed by community members. This was a question that folks could select all that apply, so some were doubled up a little bit. Same with our school affiliation. I pointed out each school that was impacted within the options here, so you can see Fairview, Grant, Russell Boulevard, and West Boulevard. They have arrows next to them. Beyond Grant, which was our highest represented group, Hickman was the next highest. So moving on to our recommendation, we are recommending option 1. If you look on this slide, the map is showing option 1. On the top, we have our level of support for all 3 options. Option 1 did receive the highest level of support from the community, and then we have our metrics below. Any questions or comments? Or?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Leave option 1 up. I think just to keep things streamlined, rather than trying to keep track of the first rounds and second rounds of cards, if we have questions or comments about phase 1, I'm going to propose that we have a limited informal discussion prior to a motion being made and go just around the table, and then have a first round of questions or comments, and then a second round of questions or comments, and then if we're ready for a motion at that time, then a motion can be offered. Unless there's any objection, we'll proceed that way. Okay. Ms. Snodgrass, do you have questions or comments?
Sure. I just want to start by thanking Karen for all the work. I know that it is a lot, and a lot of different things that are being considered, and a lot of different options, and just a lot overall. So thank you for that work. Of the options that were presented, I will say I appreciate the recommendation for option one. It feels like the one of what was presented that makes the most sense in terms of connecting in an area into the rest of the neighborhood that would be going to that school, and the least disruption for, or I guess disruption for the least number of students. I understand that it's potential disruption for any of the students. I think when I consider all of it, I'm going to go back to the issue that I raised at our regular session meeting, which is I know that there is a lot of work that has been started on phase 2 and 3, and that completes sort of the bigger picture in terms of how different schools are feeding into other schools, and how we're starting to think about a lot of our different boundaries. And for me, a piece that is missing and being asked to vote for just this first phase tonight is the fact that we don't have all of those options in front of us. And so I feel like it would be helpful. I guess I'll also add that I think at this late date, it feels really hard to ask parents to suddenly switch for the next school year, and also for our admins who potentially need to restaff at some of the schools. So I think that I personally am wondering still about the possibility of being able to take all of the survey data, all this information, but move this change into what is presented, to essentially roll phase 1 and phase 2 together, so that nothing potentially changes in this coming school year, 24-25, but that it becomes part of the change for the next school year, which feels like it would give everyone a lot more time. And also, I'll just say for myself, I would really appreciate, and I did, having had a chance to sit for a couple hours earlier today, being able to sort of really examine how this change fits into the bigger picture of the rest of the changes that are being proposed.
Thank you, Jean. Blake, you don't have anything? Okay, Mr. Cobbins, do you have anything?
Not at this time.
Okay. I just will quickly mention that I agree the timeline. I have felt like the timeline is very compressed, and that there are several good reasons for postponing the implementation of any phase were we to decide anything tonight, because kindergartners have already enrolled, summer school is already set, teachers have already been hired, and all of those things having to shift and take place over the next 4 months feels very squeezed. So I'm contemplating the possibility of either going with option 1, but deciding to implement it a year from now, or rolling phase 1 into phase 2. That's kind of like, I'm kind of between those two things. The only reason to not make a decision tonight is, well, there's 2 reasons. One is because we're weeks away from seeing the rest of the information. And then the other is because I know there's several hundred parents that are like hanging in the lurch waiting for us to make a decision. And I am sorry about that, but it may be in the best interest of everyone to pause and wait for additional information. So, as you know, yet to be determined. Mr. Lyman?
Yes, thank you, Karen, for indulging my emails and sending you an email, and then 5 minutes later, immediately sending another one with another question or comment about something. Option 1 is, I think, the one that makes the most sense for a lot of different reasons. It alleviates the stress, some of the stress at Fairview from 86% utilization to 75%. That growth that we're expecting with Fairview, in the next few years, we've got to make room for that so that we're not having to revisit, those moves soon. Delaying it till the 25-26 school year. When we had, I think it was one of the public comments, somebody came in and was talking about how over the last 20 years, Fairview has really developed a really good relationship with the families in the neighborhood that we're talking about moving. And at the end of the day, it's important to remember that that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about not just coloring a block different on a map. We're talking about, kids and families, et cetera. So the relationship that Fairview's built, I am in full confidence of our staff at Russell. That's not just me being a former Russell Raven saying that. It's giving them, rather than 4 months, giving them 18 some odd months to be welcomed to that community. I think would be a good idea. It's, option one simplifies those feeder schools. It's important to note that it does maintain or doesn't mess with some of those historical neighborhoods and things. That's, neighborhood schools, that's a huge thing, being able to walk to that playground and play at that playground. And also moving to the 25-26 school year minimizes a lot of the potential FTE moves that we may have to do. We need new teachers at Russell for those positions, only to potentially maybe have to move them in phase 2 or phase 3. So we could talk about timing later, but I think that option one is, ideal. That's kind of the best case scenario. Also, I didn't write it on my notes, but I was thinking about it. All the other changes and stuff that we're talking about are in the south, and so we kind of have to be up on that north side. So one of these three options, there really wasn't anything else I think that could be done to move somebody from the south, and it had to be somebody from the north side. Otherwise, we were going to be really, really constrained with phases 2 and phase 3, and trying to, specifically with phase 3, to make that work. So, option one, best option.
Actually, that sort of goes into my question. One of the concerns was what we promised that I heard in the last meeting was what we promised the general public. So I went back and watched all those meetings where we promised things. And one of the things that we talked about a lot in those prior meetings, in fact, it was a recommendation at one point from administration, is that we use this phase to alleviate some of the pressure from Bueller-Ralph. So I'd like to know what changed between then and now to no longer be working on pressure from Bueller-Ralph and now be working on this for these students to go to Russell.
Sure. Well, there's been a couple years there with the delay of construction, so the time frame was out, which now makes the implementation of this process closer to actually having the newer capacity at the southwest. So we're 18 months, 2 years closer to
Right.
having that capacity. So that was a change, and we still, so that's the biggest factor in that, simply that delay that was coming out of COVID with construction. That whole process at Russell has been delayed. So now the time frame in which we're waiting on Southwest to come in to service is now just 24 months, or 2 school years versus when it was much more before. So I would say that would be the major reason.
And that makes sense to me, but then I think that also begs the question that I think other people are asking. That sort of all crunches the time. So, one of the other things we promised people was to give them enough time to process. And, we said that, in fact, in one meeting, we said we try to give them a year to process a change. So does it make more sense to go ahead and move phase 1 into phase 2 and 3 so that we do give the people the time to process?
Well, definitely since the board meeting, we've been working on those scenarios. So if that's what you all choose to do, we've talked about that, even though we've provided kind of this updated timeline. We could do some of that as well, and depending on then when you want to actually do the final, because there was some discussion at the board meeting also, maybe delaying that into September. So if that's the case, there's some of this on the end of this you would want to possibly adjust. A lot of the listening work as far as the open houses, I would suggest we kind of keep with this compressed schedule because it kind of falls into the timing of the school year. If you delay that stuff, getting the information, getting a lot of feedback, showing some options up front to the public, to the community, to you all, we're going to get into summer and it's going to be very difficult to continue that work. So I think you want to continue to front load that. The actual final decisions, you can stretch those into the fall. And I would also suggest that we're very clear that with the public, if you're going to do that, we really publicize, in late May, we're going to kind of take a hiatus on this. Our internal committee will work a little bit more with it. We'll get information out to you as board members, but publicly, it'll come back probably maybe in an August timeframe, mid-August, and then start the survey, the final options be available. And then, so that's kind of some of the things we've worked through as we've thought about it and that possibility. So it can be done that way. So we're prepared to try to execute and implement on whatever you as a board decide.
While I don't like to keep my families hanging, I was listening to you that said we have to keep our promises, and one of our promises was we need to give them enough time to process. So I am very much in favor of delay, whether we choose this option and move forward, but as far as when we implement it, I do think it needs to be in phase 2.
April, it's your turn if you can hear us.
Let me put her back.
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Okay. What Jean and Paul said about rolling option 1 into phase 2 seems to make the most sense to me. However, I would like to clarify my stance on that, which is and I know there's a lot of work that's been gone into this, but what has been created thus far in option 1 vanishes. And all of those areas are reconsidered in option 2, because when we look at those included, it may come out that we might want to move one of those. Instead of moving option 1 to Russell, maybe we want to move them to West Boulevard, which is incredibly close to them, or we might want to move them to Paxton. And so I would say phase 1 goes away and we just do phase 2 and 3. In addition, in looking at the historical information, as Paul did as well, the last time we had a really large change, when we did middle school and high school boundaries, we gave the public 4 options to choose from and 4 weeks that Cooperative Strategies did to collect feedback. So as we're looking towards our future phases, with this major change of impacting multiple elementary schools and virtually all of our high schools and potentially our middle schools, we need to make sure we give the public plenty of opportunity for responses. But bottom line, I think we should look at everything holistically when we're talking about the elementary boundaries in one go. Whether we implement it in phase 2 or phase 3, regardless of which year we choose to implement different boundaries. But I think they should be considered all together. That's it.
Okay, thanks, April. I'm going to pause the discussion and just go over the timeline update because I failed to do that at the very beginning. So there's a couple things that have been kind of added and tweaked to the process timeline. And the first one is that the internal work group is planning to meet on April 23rd. And that internal work group is going to consist of, we're shooting for a representative from every single building in the district. So that would include all of our buildings to be able to give feedback on the next phases. They are going to meet on the 23rd, and then on the 29th of April, the community is going to see the phase 2 and 3 options a week prior to the open houses. And the 29th is also when the survey goes live. So we'll be getting feedback, and then we'll hold 6 in-person open houses, 3 at Aslan and 3 at our 3 comprehensive high schools. And then we've added an additional virtual open house on the 9th of May from 10 to 11:30. The survey will close on May 12th. And then on the 14th, the internal work group will meet again and kind of go over the feedback, whittle down the options. If at that time the lines move or the options change, then the expectation is that we go back to the open house process and a new survey goes out, and we have to do it over. So that potentially could stretch the timeline a little bit, but if it's pretty straightforward and the committee comes up with 2 of the best options and they review and those are presented to the board for a first read at the June meeting, then the quickest we would vote on anything would be at the July 8th meeting. But it kind of depends on what the feedback is and what tweaks are made along the way. But the time is set at least through the 14th of May. So all the open houses and the surveys and the internal work group. So just to let everybody know that. Does anyone have a second round? Go ahead, Jean.
I just wanted to comment on the timeline, which is just to say, I would like us to consider, I definitely appreciate that it might be that the internal work group and the feedback from the options for phase 2 and 3 or 1, 2, and 3, depending on how everything gets decided today, that it's very clear and there's like a very clear consensus. Even with that, I guess I wonder about having the final vote over the summer. I think that might be an opportunity to really be able to take a lot of time to incorporate feedback from all the surveys and recommendations from the internal work group, and potentially even a chance for a new long-range facilities committee or other work group to be able to look through options. And so would just ask that if maybe we would consider pausing over the summer so that internal work could happen and sort of restarting up again in August. So I know that there are some different folks that express that they'd rather have the decision made sooner rather than later, even if it's happening over the summer. But it just feels like there might be, in terms of if there are changes, being able to solicit community feedback, that will be harder to do over the summer.
Blake, go ahead.
I had some questions. If we are pushing back the student numbers that are being moved in these options, that changes, correct? Do we know what numbers those are changing to? If we were to push this back, right? Because technically the student implementation.
Well, we can't predict the number of kindergartners from this area for next year. So yeah,
Okay.
It would change year after year.
Okay. So I think that's one thing for us to take into consideration too, as we're looking at this, is that we are talking about an unknown number of students when thinking about our options. So if we are if we're going to push implementation back, that it's something to, I think, take into account of, do we make a decision tonight or not on what phase or of an option. My second kind of is more of a comment, kind of ties into what you just shared, Ms. Snodgrass. I think a prolonged process is not favorable across the board on this, primarily just due to the fact that I think that this is a hard decision to make. These are hard conversations for us to have. I don't think having this be a very prolonged thing over multiple months is going to make it easier for us or easier for the community. I think what will be easier is us to do the hard work that's going to happen no matter what, come down to a decision and make that decision. And part of that reasoning coming from it is also me thinking about the secondary decision we have to make as a board, which we've talked about in long range, is that in the past, we have been very easygoing and been able to comfortably say, yes, we can provide for students that are rising 12th, rising 8th, or rising 5th graders. They can stay at their school even though they're supposed to be moved if they want, and we'll provide busing. We're not in that same position, and that's not around a finance piece, that's out of a staffing piece of, will we have the human power to actually be able to offer that option, or even offer the option of, you could start early. And if we don't make the decision, if we don't make a decision on middle school and high school until August, and then we decide, yeah, we do have the human power to offer staying and remaining if the year that it moves, or going early, well, that freshman has already started at their high school. That 6th grader has already started at that middle school. They're not, no family's gonna say, yeah, let's go ahead and start early now that we've already had this first 2 weeks of school done, right? And so I think that's really where we have that secondary decision we have to make as a team of if we're gonna be able to offer that or not. And I agree with what Mr. Gooch shared in our long-range facilities planning committee meeting, where he said his recommendation was know your maps before you make that decision, because then you'll be better able to know what does that encompass. And so that's where I go, it's a secondary decision it's gonna have to wait till after. So that's where I go in thinking that a prolonged approach isn't the most favorable.
April's had her hand raised.
April, can you wait until we go around the circle, or do you have her immediate, okay, she's nodding yes. Just so I can keep it straight in my brain, but I see your hand.
I
Thank
can
you.
wait.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cobbins, do you have anything? Okay. I will say, I appreciate that nuance of the grandfathered students kind of knowing where they're gonna go. That's a super good point. I think if we can get the options done pretty succinctly and the internal committee can have time to look at them, unless something changes, this is a timeline that we can deal with. If there are additional options that come out of that internal committee, that's when things get stretched. But there is a full month between the first read and the second read. So there is a little bit of time in there. I agree. I don't like doing, super important things during our summer months, but in this case, I feel like the need to know and the need to plan may outweigh that. And then the only other comment I had was about the number of students. I can see why it would be a factor that it's not going to be exactly 59, but year to year, we make a lot of predictions about kindergarten enrollment that end up being like a little bit accurate. And in that time, students could move in, students could move out. So there's always going to be some fluidity in the enrollment numbers. And so
With that
I'm less
number,
worried about that.
which is a pretty small number, the fluctuation is not going to be really significant. I mean, probably 2 or 3, 4 students either way. I mean, just realistically.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if it's 10%, that's 6 students. It's not, we're not talking about like 100 kids moving in all of a sudden. So that's all I have.
I'm trying to not overthink it too much, but that's the problem is that I'm overthinking it and everybody's saying things that are very smart and making me overthink it, which is fine. That's why there's 7 of us and that's why we do this. I'm hesitant to not approve an option now, regardless for phase 1, regardless of when we implement it. Ms. Farad does bring up a good point in that, are we sure that the section that we're talking about would be the one that we would want to move if we were to do it all at the same time. I mean, what do we think? If we didn't pick option one, so the Fairview block, and I mean, what are the chances of that going to a school other than Russell?
And the only other option for that area, it's in an interesting place because
I
you
mean, you
mentioned
could
west.
go to Paxton Keeley, but then they're going to be big and full, and you got to
Right.
move somebody away from them.
If they don't stay at Fairview, Russell is really the next logical place for them.
So then where would we get kids from Russell then, or get kids to send to Russell then, if we didn't take that block? And we left that Grant block alone, and we left that West Boulevard block alone. Your eyes got a little big there. I saw it.
Well, my mind went to islands, and that's I don't
Skittles.
think we want to go down that
Right.
road. So.
So kind of the long and the short of it is that's really kind of, that's kind of the block that we have to really kind of look at until we start getting weird with, moving, disrupting neighborhood schools and walking and all of that sort of stuff. That's just kind of, we're limited with where or with what else is happening. Otherwise, we could probably pick something else, but it's going to represent gigantic changes in phases 2 and 3. We could erase all the lines and start over, but that would just be catastrophic for families and everything else and all of us. And
And the
So
last
this
thing
is-
we want to do is move somebody in one phase just to move them again. Like
Right.
that is not
So
something, like,
as limiting as it feels, it is limiting, but it's also, it's probably the ideal option if, again, we're talking about kids, which is, we got to remember. So yeah, I'd like to get something done now with that phase in mind, knowing that our West Boulevard and our Grant families, even though you would not be moving in this phase, a chance theoretically still exists for phase 2 and phase 3 for those moves to happen. So continue to pay attention to all these sorts of things, which I've tried to tell everybody, is this is not over when this part's over, that it's going to continue. Pushing everything kind of, if we can get everything done, in the time frame, President Waters, that you outlined, that makes sense to me. My fears is that in the process of looking at, the 6 or the 10 options that we get for phase 2 or phase 3, somebody's going to have a good idea like Blake, where they're going to look at it and go, or whatever the collective was that looked at that and go, well, what if we did this instead? And all of a sudden there's this third option, and just, we can't push it a month, we can't push it a week, because literally a week after, we're into graduation and things get weird and people leave. So it's like, we got to be really good with our options. We're phase 2 and phase 3.
No pressure.
No pressure. Because, like, again, if we do come up with a new idea, it's like, we've got to push this thing until the fall. So we got to be, and I'm confident in a giant committee and everything else to do that, so.
And also, I'm humble enough to say it obviously wasn't a great option. We can see by the survey results. Like,
No, but
and we
looking
got
at it, yeah.
immediate response. That's why at
Yeah.
the board dies, I said, blame me. That's
No,
me.
it was-
No, the rest.
But that's,
like,
but that's how the process is supposed to work, though. It's supposed to be something where we get the options and we kind of look at things and go, well, what if we did, I like this, and I don't like that, and I like this, and what if we, that's what's
exactly.
supposed to kind of happen. So that was cool to kind of see and be a part of. Again, geography, maps, I like that stuff. So yeah, I'd like to have an option tonight, just so that our families kind of know when that implementation happens. I mean, that we can figure that out, but it all kind of makes sense to me.
Did you already speak to implement now versus later?
I would prefer implementing later. So yeah, option 1, approving option 1, and then starting that in the 25-26 school year for FTE, for giving those students a chance to, get acclimated to, the new school, et cetera. There's not a huge need right now. If Fairview is at 110% capacity or something like that, I'd be like, we got to make this move now, but we're not. We're kind of just moving some puzzle pieces. But yeah.
Paul, you got anything else?
I actually think we need to give our parents as much time as possible to process what our decision is. So I agree, we need to make it sooner rather than later. I do think option 1 is probably the only option I see myself voting for tonight, if we are going to vote for an option tonight. But when we get the options for the parents that are coming up in just a couple weeks, how many options are they actually going to see? It's going to be more than just the two like this time. It's going to be a much broader, because we're talking about a larger area, correct?
Yeah, there will probably be 3 to 5 options that we present to the community after they're narrowed down and tweaked by the committee next
So
week.
this will be more like the options we saw 8 years ago whenever we did the elementary and middle schools, and we'll have those broad options. We'll have the presentations for the parents and the families, and we will look at it from a much broader perspective than this. Okay, thank you.
April, you're up.
Okay, I wanted to kind of comment on a couple of things. John talked about in this phase, or if we threw this out and we moved the kids in that island that go to, well, not technically an island, but the kids in that area that currently go to Fairview, and what if we move them to Paxton Keeley, and then we're going to have to move some Paxton Keeley kids. We're probably going to have to, that's going to happen anyway. If we move kids from Fairview to Russell, we're very likely going to be moving some kids from Russell to a different school when we open the Southwest Elementary School. So there's going to be a domino impact, which is part of the reason why I prefer us looking at it holistically. And then I was confused on something that Blake said, talking about grandfathering and waiting until August to make the decision. And, if kids wanted to start early, they would have already, can you clarify that, Blake?
Yeah, so, because implementation of the middle school and high schools would be beginning in the 2025, 2024, or 2025, 2026 school year. And we'll have already started the 2024, 2025 school year. So those kids that would be moved, if they were starting their first year in high school or first year in middle school, they're beginning their first year of that in the building they're not going to be in next year, the following year. And if let's say we do end up going to that space of saying, we will have the human power, like, we're going to be in that option, we will be able to provide that. We're saying that after families have already been introduced to their kids' teachers, beginning that process of culture acclimation into those buildings. I don't know. There might be a family that were to take up the option, but I wouldn't foresee a family probably be like, yeah, let's do that.
Well, no, that makes more sense. And that's something that we did last time when we changed high school boundaries. We gave the kids the option that if they were an incoming freshman, they could start at what would be their new high school the following year. So now I understand that, because I was like, well, if we decide in August, we'd still have 11 months to determine FTE and transportation and plan for that for the 25-26. But I understand what you're saying, that if we waited until August to decide on that middle school, high school, and whatever phase of the elementary school boundaries, that we would be deciding on at that time. And then if we chose to do some sort of grandfathering or early attendance option, it would not give those families enough time to, particularly if they were starting early at a school prior to being required to, it wouldn't give them enough time to plan for that.
Yeah, correct. I would say, I guess the best summary way of my long space of saying it is that if we wait to make this final decision until the beginning of this coming school year in August or in September, we remove the option of doing any early entry, any discussion around that. And we can only have a conversation around remaining for one additional year.
Right, correct. Which I don't remember the notes from when we opened battles. So we were also going from 7th, 8th, 9th. No, we were going from 8th, 9th to, so every 9th grader was starting a new high school at that time.
Correct.
Okay, well, I still have my same feelings, so, thank you.
That was a long way to get there.
Yeah,
Just kidding,
well, I
honey.
wanted to clarify those two things.
I'm just kidding. It's all good. It's all good to like talk it out. Before we do like a quick round three, Karen, can you speak to the possibility of what April mentioned about the Fairview, what was your question, April? You wondered if that population that we're moving from Fairview to Russell would move from
So where
Paxton?
what I'm saying is that, John was saying that we take that Fairview, if we threw everything out and we re-looked at this and Fairview might move to Paxton, Paxton would then, we'd have to take some to go to Paxton. When we open the Southwest Elementary School, it is very likely that if we go with option 1 now, Fairview kids would go to Russell. When we open the Southwest Elementary School and we're redrawing a bunch of new boundaries, some kids from Russell could very likely be impacted at that time. So regardless of where we send the Fairview kids, whether we go with option 1 now and move the Fairview kids, or scrap option 1, phase 1, and figure out if they still go to Russell or if it makes sense to go to a different elementary school, there are kids that are going to be moving. A lot of kids that are going to be moving just because we're opening the Southwest Elementary School and we're going to have to be shifting. Again, it's a big domino. And so since I don't know what's been discussed in option 2 and or in phase 2, and we probably didn't consider any of this stuff in phase 1, if we were to consider the stuff that's in phase 1 as in phase 2, would that change where these kids are being proposed to go?
April, I love the way you're talking. You sound like a demographer. So I've looked at quite a few options already in that area. We can't really put them into Mary Paxton Keeley without relieving Keeley somewhere else. And there's not really a great place to relieve them other than Fairview. So while we could push them, it would probably be just a flip-flop of Fairview and Mary Paxton Keeley. A lot in the options that I have drawn, the Southwest Elementary School is really focused on relieving Beulah Ralph, Mill Creek, and Rockbridge. Those are the 3 that it's doing a lot in. It doesn't really extend beyond that like Smithton Gentry line where it currently exists. That's the little line right above the purple Beulah Ralph right there. So there are some dominoes associated with that. When we open the new school, we can't leave the other schools empty, so we have to push north a little bit. But Mary Paxton Keeley isn't really a part of that. West is kind of in the same boat. They are projected to continue to grow. So while that area is fairly close to West Elementary School, we can't fit them in that school with the projected growth as well. So the 2 realistic options for that area are either leave them at Fairview or move them to Russell for that, if that helps.
Okay, thank you, Karen. All right, are there any lingering third rounds? Go ahead, Jean.
I just want to say I withdraw my let's extend the process because I think people made really excellent points. I tend to lean towards April's point of view in terms of because I think we do need to make a decision, and also I think if we're going to have the rest of the information within the next couple weeks, that waiting so that we can potentially see some options, even if it is just between them at Russell or them staying at Fairview in the next phase, that might give us a few more options. And the other thing I would say is in terms of thinking about then a more compressed timeline, would we want to consider a first read at the work session on May 23rd, and then the vote in June. That still is a full over 3 weeks from when the survey opens in terms of collecting feedback, and might also, after a vote, give us, after it goes live, not after it closes.
My,
At the work session in May, if that was the first read, but also thinking about some of the things Blake was mentioning, if we want to be able to get from the administration some of the information about how many kids would be impacted that potentially might want to start at their new schools, or if that's a possibility for kindergarten, things like that, that provides some additional time to consider whether that's a viable option or not. So that was all.
Karen she's a little concerned about making it for that board session in May. We talked about it today. I think everybody feels good that we could obviously have that first read in June, but
Yeah, I would worry that that's not enough time, especially if we do need to take like pieces and parts of different options and combine them into a different option. Then I just don't, I worry that that's not enough. And we also don't meet with the long range planning committee until the 5th either. I don't know if that makes a difference, but
I mean, I think we should just operate on the assumption that you're going to do a really good job and give us good options. But I mean, as long as it doesn't happen where we have to change anything, is the concern is if there are between the internal work group, the Board of Education reviewing it, all of the, the community feedback, all the open houses and everything else, that if there was if we've got 7 options or 3 options that we're looking at, if there's a 3B that pops up, that we want to just take a quick peek at, that's your concern, is being able to push that all out and get everything at the same.
yeah, we received almost 1,000 survey responses on just this one.
What
So I'm concerned that I just won't have enough time.
time frame on that? Did you get the majority of them in the first 72 hours or the last 72
Yes.
hours?
Well,
Okay.
yes, I did.
So, okay.
so if you just look at May is pretty intense because you have all our open houses, so there'll be information that we're collecting from that. During that time, survey will be open, input will be coming in, and we don't want to shut it down immediately on the conclusion of the open houses, so we plan on running that a few days beyond that. That's the 12th. That just doesn't, that's a pretty short turnaround with all that information. And then we wanted to take that back with that information that we rolled up from all that to that internal work group again to get one more look and say, okay, this is what we heard, we think. And I agree with you. I think Karen will probably create great options, like she always does. But in the event there is even some minor, then, I mean, it's going to be pretty tight.
I think right now, we don't have to worry about, we're not deciding tonight what happens after May 23rd. That's going to depend on what happens between now and then. So, I mean, but just knowing that, trying to get a first read for the 23rd would be a little bit too tight for Karen. That's good to know. But right now, we just need to focus on what are we going to do about phase 1 and then let the rest of it play out.
If we're getting after all of the things, we're going to get an update on the 13th at the board meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, that'll have some of the early survey stuff, et cetera. The internal work group will meet stuff. We'll maybe get another little tidbit of info on the 23rd, all the while the online form is still going to be available for folks to, there won't be that formal survey, but all the while there'll be that constant, barrage of good information, because it all has been.
I think one thing we can do too, we can, as we start narrowing down, particularly after the end of May there, that last part of May, and we're knowing where some of these are. Usually we've waited until the board approves the final option to really start working through some of the grandfathering in the early, because it's a lot of stuff to calculate. But I think since we're working on a pretty tight timeline here, with every one of those options, we can go in and start applying what that would look like for each of them. So then theoretically, you could make that decision on the option, and then you could turn around and already have some information on that. So really dovetailing that tighter. Does that make sense? I mean,
Well, starting the grandfathering conversations and the transportation.
right, and like,
As
instead of
we
us
are-
waiting until you make your final decision and going back and calculating that all out, we'll start looking at what maybe the 2 or 3 finals, do that full calculation on all of those, so then you could begin talking about that immediately.
Having that like transportation cost index is gonna be a factor.
Sure.
I think, so
Yeah.
having those pieces in there and being able to think about if we wanna set a deadline for families to request early admission or things like that. April had her hand up and then Blake, so April, go ahead.
I'm gonna kind of go backwards. In the last elementary boundary change, we actually had in the presentations the number of 5th graders should they decide to stay at their school. So I think that would be good information to have. Also in there was wonderful maps of every single elementary school and their walkability, which I thought was also great. I had a couple of questions for Karen. I just wanted to confirm. Karen, you said something, I believe, about West Fairview and maybe Paxton increasing in population. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about Paxton, but Grant was the other one on that list that's projected to grow.
And so West Fairview and Grant. Do you have new numbers since the numbers that we got in March of 23?
Oh yes,
That was
yes.
part of our financial.
Yeah, I can send those to you. We have a full report. It does enrollment. we
I
did
would
enrollment
love to
projections.
see that.
Yeah.
I thought the one that was in our thing was the latest. And then are you saying, because one of the things that we talked about, it was either in long range planning or in one of our board meetings, is I think it was in long range planning that we talked about when we were considering what the new Russell was going to look like, that we would probably have to be looking to the things to the north, which is what these options are, because when we get to the Southwest Elementary School, there'll be a lot of things shifting. And so it was possible that Russell could be impacted from that, which is why we didn't look at the south of Russell. Are you thinking that's not going, I mean, I don't want to give anybody false hope, but I'm just wondering if that thought process is still the same.
It definitely is.
Okay.
Once we relieve Beulah Ralph, and the new school sits in Mill Creek's boundary, so we're gonna have to take
Right.
a little bit of Mill Creek into the new school, and that boundary will need to push north a little bit further,
Right.
and likely into the Russell boundary, if not Grant or.
Well, I'm not a demographer, but I kind of had in my head, if I were, drawing a map at the very beginning, I was like, well, we should just take a little bit of Paxton, move them to Fairview, take a little bit of Fairview, move them over to Russell. That's where my brain was going. But you are the expert with maps for sure. So, okay, that's it.
Things.
Blake, did you have something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate what you said, Ms. Snodgrass, of like thinking around if there, and I understand President Waters that you said that like really we can think about the future after the 14th, or yeah, May 14th later. But I did just want to say on that front, I think one thing that would be really nice if, and I understand there's going to be a ton of comments. So I get it, like if it's not. But if we are able to do sooner, the only benefit I think that could provide us, especially if we really, when I think about allowing students to start early, I think it's great if we can offer that to our middle school students. That's awesome. My real want would be to offer that to our incoming freshmen, because they will have already visited the high school they were slotted to go to at this point, right? We will already be in summer. And if we're able to make this decision in early June or mid-June, right, it sets us up to where potentially those kids, if those kids and those families in the conversations go, you know what, maybe we do want to start early, those principals and those administrators at those high schools can think about creating some opportunities for those kids to come visit those schools before the school year begins, to then be able to make that call of, do I want to start early or not, right? And I get that's a large space of looking there, but my thing is just that is going to, it's hard in middle school. Middle school's hard. We all know middle school's hard. And it's going to be hard to make a transition there. I just, my heart leans very heavily on, I really want us to be able to have this opportunity for our incoming freshmen to make an early move decision, because I think that continuity of high school will be very impactful and beneficial to them if that's the decision that they and their families want to make, and we're able to offer that, right? And I get that it's all question marks and probabilities, right? I get it, what I'm saying there. So that's just one thing I wanted to comment on that. I did want to say, Vice President, not John, what's your last name? John Lyman, Vice President Lyman. Earlier, way earlier, in this conversation too, we've been talking a lot about the South, right? And I do just want to capitalize on, yes, it is impacting the whole district. We also have an elementary addition happening at Battle Elementary. Mm-hmm. The North is going to be impacted too. So a lot of the conversation is about the South in the elementary conversation, because it's a whole building. Mm-hmm. But I think remembering that coming next fall, not this fall, but fall 25, we're opening an additional elementary wing at Battle Elementary. Mm-hmm. So we'll have capacity to bring in there. And so I don't want anyone, because not out of ill intent of anybody, a lot of the conversation just a lot of times get focused in on the new building being built. Mm-hmm. We do have that addition that's going to need kids.
Blake, I love your idea with the freshmen and being able to take a look. The only question I have specifically about that then is that I know when Battle opened up, a lot of athletes from Hickman moved to Battle, et cetera, et cetera. How does that impact MISHA eligibility for incoming freshmen if they don't theoretically live in the school zone that they are in and they're going early? You know what I mean? Doesn't impact at all?
Not.
Okay.
No.
So as long as it doesn't impact them kids.
And we had those same questions when we did that move, but
okay.
No, it does not, because it is a legitimate move sanctioned by the Board of Education, okay. And it's not a shell game to do that. Yeah. It's simply sound education and part of the attendance area assignments. So, yes.
It's always a thing every year. So
absolutely.
Just want to make sure.
Thank you.
Sports.
Are there any other questions or comments? All right. Does anyone have a motion? I think John does.
have a motion.
Go for it.
I'll make sure April's hand wasn't raised. I'd like to make a motion to approve option 1 of phase 1 of the CPS redistricting with implementation to occur in the 25-26 school year.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Mr. Lyman and a second from Mr. Harper to adopt option 1, which is the recommendation, but have it be implemented a year past when we had originally planned to implement it. So there would be, those kids would not move until August of 25 instead of this year. Ms. Snodgrass.
I just want to clarify that if we vote for this option, this piece of it now, that means that area will be included as part of Russell in any of the options that are presented to us for the next two phases. So that group in that particular area is then pretty much the only group that is guaranteed to be anywhere, right? Like they are for sure at Russell
Yes.
starting in 25, 26. In theory, everybody else is up for grabs. Right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
I mean, just
You are
because,
correct.
I mean, we're saying, because we're,
Yeah.
we're
Yes.
agreeing,
They're a
we're
safe
saying
zone.
like this, we are not voting to move that particular group of 55 to 60 students again.
Correct.
And you feel, and I just to clarify too, because I know that you have been working through many, many, many options for all these subsequent phases, Karen, that you feel really confident that there are a lot of good options and that it gives you enough possibilities with this option being selected in terms of all the different things you're trying to consider moving forward around all the demographics and busing and all the things.
Absolutely. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Are there any other questions or any discussion? All right, this will be a roll call vote.
Okay. Ms. Snodgrass,
Yes.
Mr. Cobbins,
It didn't get off. Abstain.
okay. Mr. Willoughby,
Yes.
Ms. Farrell,
No,
Mr. Harper,
Yes.
Mr. Lyman,
Yes.
Ms. Waters.
Yes.
The motion passes.
All right, the motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 abstention, and 1 no. So option 1 has been adopted and will be implemented in the fall of '25. All right, stay tuned for phases 2 and 3 very soon. And we will keep the link open to contact the board throughout the entire process. But a survey will go out on April 29th for phases 2 and 3. Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Oh, wait, can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
So with that being approved and given the other conversation that we had, if there are students living in that area that are planning to begin kindergarten this coming fall, are we able to determine what it might look like if we wanted to offer to those families the opportunity to start at Russell versus starting kindergarten at Fairview?
Do we know how many kindergartners there are there?
No.
Not off the top of my. Oh.
Kindergartners are
No.
kind of that
No, you don't know.
roll of the dice. Here is the thing, there's enough capacity at Russell with that new addition that there's a flexibility in there. I don't think you're gonna have so many that you're gonna overrun that, and I don't think that's going to be a huge impact. So that is a possibility that you could do. Now, realize, to some extent, that's a precedent you're setting for maybe the subsequent early starts and grandfathering you're gonna do. But yes, I think simply because this is a relatively very small move, and I think with the capacity we now have at Russell, I don't anticipate that would be something we couldn't manage.
And
I-
is the process for wanting to be able to offer that to families something that the board would vote to do? And I do understand what you're saying about if we offer it for this particular group, does that open it up to say we are guaranteeing we're going to open that up for everything? Although I would say I think there is a difference just because of it being the addition and the increased capacity specifically at Russell. I know that the request, for example, for transfers, that deadline I believe was April 1st, so it's passed and stuff. So if there are families that are specifically in that area affected that have kids that might be starting kindergarten that are interested or want to get more information about those possibilities, what is the recommended process
Well, I
in
think
terms
if-
of, does it need to have board approval specifically, or can families at least reach out if they want that information?
I think if the board desires to do that, you would need to move to allow early starts for kindergartners for anybody in that group to be able to start. That will not take a transfer because that's only if you don't meet those requirements. So this is a very specific part, so it wouldn't be into that transfer deadline or anything like that. So I think that would be the way that we could manage it on our end and that sort of thing. I don't think and like I said, due to the relatively small numbers that won't be a hard one-off type thing to manage.
April, did you have a question or comment?
Yes. I know it impacts likely a very small number of students if we wanted to consider allowing kindergartners to go ahead and start this year at Russell. Can we explore what that would look like as far as transportation? Because that's certainly not an area in which students could walk or bike to Russell. I mean, do we need to look at that?
I would imagine with the numbers we're talking, it would either be another route. I don't think it would necessarily have to be a complete route. I'm sure we can, once we
You're
kind of know
correct.
that-
I believe there's already a bus that picks students up there and takes them to West.
Yes. And
Boulevard.
we may do a smaller bus or something like that to do that, or combine a route. But I think that, just simply because the numbers are not going to be that large, I think we can
Right.
manage that as kind of a customized process.
Okay, thank you.
So you're saying we do need to decide by board vote tonight if we're going to allow early
start.
for kindergartners who would be otherwise at Fairview next year, so that they're not doing 1 year at Fairview and then going to Russell. Okay, but we don't know how many students that's impacting quite yet. But we assume it's not a lot.
I won't say I would say it's always gonna be under 10. I mean, the numbers, just if you would take that 59 and divide it across that age group, I mean, you're gonna be.
Well, if we're adding 10 kindergartners to Russell possibly next year, I think we need to figure out, are they going to need another kindergarten section? Like what's their enrollment looking like in kindergarten? Are they like 25, and is that going to put them at 28? And so hiring.
Well, I think when you as a board, if you make that decision, then if that's the case, there is another section needed, that would be something that we would have to make happen. So, I mean, I think that's, first of all, if we were talking a different grade than kindergarten, it'd be easier to estimate. But kindergarten is kind of that question mark anyway. Nobody really knows exactly how many kindergartners are going to show up in any building.
So the other part of that is if there is a family who is affected in this small little chunk of Columbia that wants to take advantage of that, what is the deadline for, like, how are they going to get communicated? Like, we're going to have to communicate specifically with those families that have rising kindergartners and ask them if they are going to want to move. And we're going to need to know that pretty soon, because that's going to drive the FTE discussions, correct? Like,
Yes, I also think that if we're going to be off, there is in some ways, I was at Fairview and talking with them, and this population of kids are all on the same bus. And so I was there at the end of the day, like they were on, that's the students that are there right now, like they ride, that's the bus that they got on and they go and get picked up there. I think if we're gonna be saying we're only offering this to kindergartners, you're going to have potentially maybe 2 families take it up because they're gonna have siblings that then would be going to another school and why. And these are families that are, I am not going to, I don't want to make an assumption. I just know from the conversations that I've been having that a lot of times these are families that they have a lot of extenuating circumstances that are occurring and that impact transportation, impact the ways of engagement. And so trying to say that we're going to offer this opportunity, right, but only to one of your kids and not to all of your kids, I think is just not a great option to do. I think if we're going to say that we're going to do early, we're going to say all of your kids can go early if that's what it is. That then sets up right where we do have to think about FT and we do have to talk about that. And so to me, then that goes into the more favorable option from my assessment and where I'm feeling on that is that sense of just not offering early going in at this point right now for those purposes of we just don't know. And around for everybody, while at the same time, and I know it sounds like I'm saying completely opposite things I just earlier said. I understand that, but it's more of just me thinking around the fact that you're not going to have a family split up their siblings, and so in some ways, we're not really giving these families an option if we're just saying your kindergartner can go.
I think, well, isn't that how it would work with any grandfathering situation? You know, if somebody has a 9th grader and an 11th grader and they want to start early, we don't let everybody move, or, you know, we don't let younger siblings, older siblings necessarily. Yeah. So, and I think if we're talking about families, that's a different number, and that's different grade levels. That's pushing enrollment scenarios, like throwing that all in the blender right now, which is, I don't like the idea of bringing up all those questions. I'll let you go back. I'll get back to you. I think it makes sense for us to figure out prior to making this decision, how many kindergartners are we talking about? How many of those incoming kindergartners have siblings? And, you know, if it's 2, then this isn't a big deal. If it's 10 and all of them have older siblings, then we need to make sure we're being clear it's only for the kindergartners. And if the kindergartner stays, then if the kindergartner wants to start early, it's only the kindergartner. And if you want to keep all your kids at the same school, then you keep everybody at Russell or Fairview next year and then move them to Russell the next year.
Carrie, help me. Kindergarten enrollment, when is that happening?
So enrollment's still happening, but we have, I know we're projected to have at least 80, a little over 80 kindergartners right now before Fairview students would come to us. And so I don't know that we have exactly 80 enrolled at this moment, but our enrollment after our kindergarten welcome was higher this year than it was last year at this time. And we have 85 kindergartners this year.
And it's wrapped up for the main enrollment phase?
Yeah.
For the year, so, okay.
Yeah. So do we have 85? We have our kindergarten sections are all at like 22. So we have 88 kindergartners this year. So we're about 22 for each kindergarten class this past year. And we were on projection to be that or higher. Yeah, with 4 sections.
And do you know for sure if Fairview has completed theirs yet or not?
I mean, everybody's on the
that's
same
not a fair
timeline. Yeah, everybody's on the same
Not a fair
timeline right now.
question, just
So
asking you if you
kindergarten,
did.
I can go back to my newsletter to look at the exact date. Hold on here for a second. But kindergarten enrollment is still going. It's just most of them have probably enrolled at this point. So, but I'm looking at my newsletter right now because it's been a standing thing in there.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Okay, Blake and then Paul.
So to me, there's a difference between letting a child remain for their last year and letting a child go early if they're going to have siblings that are just going to be joining them the next year. So to me, that's the difference, right? Of saying you, kindergartner, you can go, but your sibling that's in 3rd grade, they can't go until 4th grade next year. Like that, to me, that's a big difference than saying, child who you're in your 8th grade or you're going into your 12th grade year, you can remain if you want, but your sibling that's in 9th grade or your sibling that's in 6th grade can't. That's a little bit different because they would already have to be moving to, and they would be going to that school just in very similar ways here at the elementary level. It's just more grades that you're in the factoring, right? Of any child starting this coming school year that would be in kindergarten through 4th grade in that pocket of students will be going, unless we provide a grandfathering for 5th grade, would be going to Russell.
Okay, Paul, but, yeah,
We have to consider that all this, while it is phase one and phase two are happening at the same time. I don't feel like we can make a different grandfathering decision for phase one when they're all in phase two. So I really feel like since we're going to be making this decision in the next 45 days, we should make it globally for the entire population, not just for this one little islandish area at the top of this map.
okay, that makes sense. Okay, April, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Paul just made a lot of sense, and it gives us time. I would like to go down my rabbit hole and see what we historically did when we allowed 9th graders who were going to be at a new high school the following year, if we allowed their sibling that maybe was in 10th grade or 11th grade to move schools. And if I'm not mistaken, historically, when we have allowed 5th graders, rising 4th graders that are going to be 5th graders to stay, we allow their siblings to stay. But if I recall correctly, once the oldest leaves, the youngest sibling moves on to their new school. Is that correct, Randy, or do you?
I think, I'm kind of thinking back to the last time we did high school, which that was the most complex of that. We did not, I don't believe we did a whole lot with siblings. It was the actual student.
That's what I recall.
I will pull that document because it was a fairly complex document in that it actually spanned a 3-year period, because we were allowing, at that point, juniors and seniors to go early if they wanted. The reason that was considered was because that junior year, that's oftentimes your most challenging academically. That's when you're kind of building that foundation for scholarship and that sort of thing. So that's why we did that. So I will make sure we retrieve that, because that's on Assembly, and that we can kind of share out and look at that, because but I don't think we dipped down into siblings simply because that started to really push our transportation costs and that sort of thing. But I will pull that, and because that was a pretty good document, and that would be something that we want to look at. We get a little bit deeper into this, particularly for the next two phases, because it was a plan that worked and was pretty well accepted. So.
Okay, thanks.
And I'd be interested in knowing if we were to do a grandfather of if you're going to be a 5th grader at Fairview in 25-26, you can stay at Fairview potentially, and then traditionally, my recollection is your sibling could stay there. However, in 26-27, your sibling would go to whatever their newly zoned school is. Is that what you recall, or do we need to research that as well?
I'm going to have to look on that, and I'm also going to bring Michelle Baumstard into that historical knowledge. Sorry, but the secondary was such a bigger issue, and that's really what I recall the most. So we can check that. We can go back into the minutes, pull any of that that was implemented on that, as well as then she knows back beyond that, the 3 that I've done. So.
And we may have done it different ways when we did different elementary boundaries.
We did.
There may not have been a set way we've done it in different years.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
probably true. I think it depends
I
on the
would bet on
numbers.
that.
Yeah.
I think we need to know, like, we need to know the numbers.
Yeah.
And we've talked about incoming freshmen, we've talked about incoming kindergartners. I think we also do need to look at those incoming sixth graders to make sure, just if we're gonna do them all, I mean, this year, looking at the CSIP numbers and everything for the presentations and that, we know that our sixth graders are the ones who, I mean, middle school's rough. And we don't want to put them in one school and then immediately the next year, hey, you get to go someplace else. It's not going to be very many, but in all likelihood, but maintaining that consistency, getting it early. And we can get into the weeds like crazy, I think, on, well, if I've got a fourth grader and an incoming kindergartner and I mean, there's going to be 10,000 different things. I think we need to try to limit that as much as possible while maintaining that. I mean, we've talked a lot about neighborhood cohesiveness, the family cohesiveness and stuff is important as well. But yeah, before I would be comfortable making any sort of decision on any of that sort of stuff, I mean, I need some April Farrow data.
And I agree with what everything else saying around a holistic. The reason why I was saying making a very special caveat was if we were doing something very specific for this pocket of population, it's such a small amount. It's only 59 students, right, that we would be having to do additional busing for if all of them said, we want to go early, in comparison to saying to a whole district, right? So please know that I'm advocating, what I was advocating for was solely if we were creating a very specific rule for this pocket of families. When it comes to the holistic, as we're looking into phase 2 and phase 3, right? Yes, 1 year. You can remain an additional year at the end, or you can come in early if we are able to think about that manpower. Yes.
Okay. So to be continued, the grandfathering discussion when we get closer to phases 2 and 3. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.